Hello, and welcome to Hanratty on Karate. So, last episode I gave a brief history on basically the building that houses the Liverpool Red Triangle Karate Club. Now, I had quite a bit of interest from this because a lot of people train there, and if they didn't train there, they at least know about the club, and many members of the KUGB, especially the national team, did all their squad training there. So, today, what I thought I'd do was give you a little bit of insight into what the training was like at the Triangle when I was there. Now, I started karate a little bit later than kids these days. They start in their infancy, really. But I didn't start karate till I was 25. So that's late 69, 70. At the Triangle, I didn't start there. I started with Frank Vernon in Prescott. But I joined the Triangle when Frank lost that dojo, and he told me to go and train at the Triangle, which is a KGB-run club, and he was one of the founder members of the KGB, so obviously had deep ties to it, and he still trained there regularly himself. I lived in a place called Hale Wood. Now, if you know your KGB history, Hale Wood has an enormously successful karate club as well under Chris Thompson. Many famous karate come from the Hale Wood Club. Karen Finlayson, just a lot, Ian Roberts, just a whole bunch of them. They won the national championship multiple times, and Chris himself was quite a fierce competitor. But Hale Wood is about 22, 23 miles from the Triangle. Triangle is very close to downtown Liverpool on Everton Road at the top of Everton Brow, and Hale Wood was way out. I lived in one of the original houses in Hale Wood in the village, just about opposite the police station on Leathers Lane. It was a fair tab to get down to the Triangle, but once I started it, I was hooked. Couldn't think of anything else that I wanted to do. And so this is what I did. I traveled down to the Triangle. Now, advanced classes used to be before the beginners classes. They were at 6 to 7:30, and you're expected to train minimum of twice a week. Now, at that time, they didn't have like a subscription membership, so they didn't take money out of your bank account. What happened was you came along with cash in your hand, and you paid it at the end of the class. You just dropped the money in a bag, and Sensei Sherry would sit there and just take the money per class. So you paid per class cash. That didn't concern me at all. I wasn't that worried about that. So let's just run through how we went about our classes and give you a sense of atmosphere, if I can, of the club and the training itself. So approach the dojo from Everton Road, and if the gates were open, you could drive down into the courtyard if you have a car, and park there if there was space. If not, you had to find some space on the road outside, but it wasn't that difficult. Not a lot of people drove cars. They nearly all used public transport. I was lucky enough I parked down there. If there was a green Jag down there, it probably belonged to Joe Farley, and definitely the instructor's car was there, and the instructors changed their cars regularly. But remember, Bobby Poynton had a Dolomite Sprint, which is a Triumph Dolomite Sprint. Not the greatest car in the world, but quite fast. Andy and Frank used to change their cars regularly, but they always had decent cars. I drove a taxi, a black taxi like the London Hackney cabs. The reason I did this was that was my business. I was a taxi driver. I had a couple of taxi plates, which the plates were the licenses on the back, and that was where the money was, not really in the taxi. And then you made your money by, picking people up off the street. Taxis would be hailed or get called. So it wasn't a taxi to order, it was a taxi that could pick people up off the street. That's what we were licensed to do. So I had a number of these plates, and what I'd do is I'd drive nights on my cab. I'd start off by driving down to the Triangle, through the gates, and then up the stairs. Now, you climb up the stairs probably about 10 or 11 feet, because the drill hall, what used to be an old drill hall, was situated above, and this gave the floor its kind of unique feel, and it was hardwood floor, just polished to a gleam, but it wasn't really slippy, not unless you got real sweaty and then you slip, but it wasn't a slippy floor. You could get a good grip on it. So the door at the top of the stairs was open. It was open if the class was getting ready. So you put your shoes at the top of the stairs, you bowed, and you walked in, and you walked down the length of the dojo to the changing rooms. Now, the men's changing rooms were directly facing you, and the women's changing rooms were a bit to the left. I don't think they were as big as the men. I don't know. I never went in there. But I think they were smaller than the men's changing rooms, which weren't very big either. They had a little kind of alcove that was called the black belt changing room. It wasn't very big. You get maybe 3 people in there, and you were shoulder to shoulder. And the main changing room was the same, and particularly if the dojo was full. And I never seen it not full. All right. So there was 3 showers in there. And I know if you got off the floor, you better get a shower real quick if you wanted one, because when the black belts came in, everyone got out, and the black belts got to use the shower, even if you were half soaped up. So anyway, so you come out of your changing room. One door was for the black belts. It was kind of like a serving hatch closing off the changing rooms from the main dojo. And what you did was you took your place in line, wherever your grade situated you. And I say this was the advanced class, so it was like, I would say, green belt and up. And that was the advanced class. And the class was always lined up, and it was always pretty full, usually 3 rows of people, 15 people, so in a line. So you'd be about 45, 50 people in the dojo when you had a full night. You'd always start off much the same way. You do a warm-up, a little bit of cardio, loosen you up, and then you do stretching. Stretching in the triangle was quite a humbling experience, because if you look down the line, you had the likes of Frank Brennan, Bob Poynton, Jimmy Poynton. Jimmy was not as flexible as Frank, but, it was good enough. And he'd maybe have some senior visitors from another club or something like that. Of course, in the early days then, also you'd have Terry O'Neill, who's pretty flexible. You'd just be trying your best and straining your hardest. Now, Andy Sherry himself wasn't very flexible, but he wanted to be. And this is the thing about the training. None of us were as flexible as Frank, but we all wanted to be, and we certainly tried it. So then after your stretching, basically you'd all get back in line. So the bowing was very simple. You'd kneel down, bow, sensei knee right, all stand up, and do your little bit of a warm-up and you stretch. And then it was always the same. You do basics, okay? 3 steps forward, 3 steps back, 3 steps forward, oisuki, ageuki, sotuki, outside block, downward block, all this, shitouki. And then you kind of work onto drills, combination drills from different things, like putting a block and a punch together, block, punch, kick, or just moving in kicks, this kind of thing. Then maybe we'd go on to kata, whichever kata you were working on, or whichever kata you were being shown for that evening. Now, we never ever did applications for the kata. It was always the applications as they were shown in the Best Karate Series book, which, in my opinion, are utter garbage. Nobody ever asked why we did these kind of applications at all, okay? And there was no explanation of what a lot of the techniques we performed were for. We basically concentrated on building power and building speed. Going from stance to stance, moving fast, using footwork, little bit of taisabaki, although I never heard the term used by any of the instructors at the Triangle, apart from later on when we had an order come in. So we'd do these, and then if it was a Wednesday night when Andy Sherry predominantly taught on a Wednesday, we'd probably get a real, what he called a Wednesday grinder, which would leave you probably about 8 pound loss of weight through sweat and expenditure of just energy expenditure. But you'd usually end up with a lineup, and people say that this was unusual to them and they only came across it in squad training, but we had it nearly every week. And I can tell you the lineups, they build character, they build humility, they build perseverance and resilience, and they build strength, because you get a lot of adversity standing in a lineup when you got Bob Poynton, Frank Brennan, Terry O'Neill, John Bolton, Joe Farley, just a lot of other guys just coming at you one after the other. Any attack, any block and counter. You can't just stand still. You had to move. You had to try and relax and move as fast as you can. Block and counter was the name of the game. You couldn't just block, you couldn't just curl up on a ball and cry. That wasn't a good way to get out of getting a hiding. And for some reason, and there's probably a tradition in traditional clubs, any visitor usually got the brunt of it. They were really tested. So if you were a visitor to the club, not a member, then everybody come at you full bore. It got to be quite the trial. Now, I know we also did this in squad training a little later on when the squad was training there, and those were pretty vicious lineups as well. And you maybe do some freestyle sparring, finish with a little bit more kata, and then you'd bow out and head for the change rooms, try to get your shower in before the black belts came off. But they'd usually send around discussing stuff for a couple of minutes, give everyone a chance to get out the changing room. And of course you'd all line up and pay your fees then. Get your money from the change room, pay your fees. Now, the atmosphere in the triangle was fantastic. You had this gorgeous hardwood floor. You had all the windows down the left side, got little bars on them so you didn't get kicked through the window. But I remember a guy called Brian Darcy once, he was in the lineup, and he pulled his fist back to make a block and counter, and his elbow went through the window, and then on extending his fist to make the counter, he opened up his arm. I remember we had to take him over to the Liverpool Teaching Hospital, get some stitches in it. But that wasn't all the time. You might get a smack in the mouth, you might get a split lip, you might get a black eye. I think I spent a full year once with the black eyes. But it was all part of your training. It's not the way people train now, I understand that. But that was the way we trained then. And I honestly think it was probably as close to what the original karate was supposed to be than anything that you have now, which is mainly to try and keep your students and make some money. It didn't ever feel like it was a money-making concern at the Triangle. It honestly felt like it was an educational process. That's the way I treated it. So anyway, after we got through that, you'd gone a few gradings. There was a number, there was a sheet on the wall, and people were given a number. So they made sure that you were going to stay, and then your name was put on the sheet. And so you train for different things. You train for competitions. So you do a lot of freestyle kumite. You weren't allowed to enter a competition until you were green belt. Now, competitions were very different than WKF or even different than so-called traditional competitions today. There was no weight class. There was no grading difference. You fought who you came against. And what happened was when I got my green belt, I entered the North of England competition, North of England Open, still going today. And the finals were always held in the George's Hall. I'm not sure if they are now. But we did the eliminations over at the Students' Union opposite Liverpool University. And I remember my first fight, I came up against Bob Poynton. Now, I'd known Bob Poynton through the club, and we were really good friends. We've been friends right up until when he passed a few years ago. And even when I came over to Canada, I'd still speak to Bob on a weekly or monthly basis at the most. And of course, we'd meet up for different competitions around the world, just have a good laugh. He was one of the best. Anyway, he was the first guy I fought, and he was kind of messing around with me, and I managed to score the first points on him, which was a terrible mistake. Because next thing I know, I was flat on my back, and Bob's foot was planted right in the middle of my chest. So he got a nip on for that, and I was out the competition. But I generally went through the gradings, and I think I was up to about first Q, brown belt, and they started to bring in a kids class. And Andy Sherry asked me if I'd be willing to teach a little bit, so I said for sure. So basically what you had at the Triangle was you had all these high-class people who were really good at competition. They were excellent instructors. They went around the country giving seminars or courses, as they call them. And Bob Poynton used to do Thursday night. I think Monday and Wednesday were Andy Sherry. Tuesday might have been, I know we had Billy Crystal and we had Frank Vernon a few times. And then Thursday was Bob Poynton. On Friday night was Terry O'Neill. Anyway, a couple of times Bobby had asked me to take Thursday for him because he was doing a course somewhere. Forgive me if I forget which nights they trained on. I'm getting old anyway. So we do that. And then Andy asked me if I'd teach a kids class on a Sunday morning. Now, when I say kids class, these weren't little kids. These were 9, 10, 11, 12-year-olds. I said, yeah, I'd be made up to do that. And also I'd taken a few classes on Thursday for Bobby. So after the kids' classes, almost every month, there'd be squad training. And so I'd be just sitting down on the bench, and Andy never told me to bugger off. And I'd be watching the squad training. I'd say I was a little older, and I'd be able to watch the squad training and watch these guys move really fast. And you had some amazing people who come up, and some bloody big guys like Mick Ragg. I think Mick Ragg was bigger than Joe Farley, but one of my favourite fighters was a club member, John Bolton, lived over the water in the Wirral. He was a fantastic fighter. Actually, I think he beat Frank in the 78 Nationals when Terry and Stevie had that amazing fight-off. Besides that, my number on the board gradually moved up. I ended up being number 2 on the board as a kind of junior instructor, if you like. So I got to take Bobby's classes on Thursday night, and I trained the kids on a Sunday. So by this time, I was doing classes almost every night. Besides the evening classes, which was for any club member, or you didn't have to be a member, you just came in. As long as you had a KUGB licence and you paid your fee in cash, that was the criteria for training there. But there was another class that you had to get invited to, and this was every morning, 10 o'clock till noon, and it was by invitation only, and you get maybe half a dozen, maybe more black belts who at the time maybe weren't working. And I say I worked nights on cabs, so I fitted this in. And so you get the likes of Frank Cope from over on the Wirral, really good karate man, nice person. You get Terry, you get Bobby, you get Jimmy Brennan, Frank Brennan, Andy. You get a whole crowd of people who were there by special invitation. And basically you warmed yourself up, you did your basics, you did your kata, you did a lot of kumite, and you really learned how to move, especially against people like Frank and Jimmy Brennan. Jimmy Brennan, probably one of the toughest guys I know. It was like hitting a bag of hammers. If you hit him, you hurt your hand. He was honestly tough man. And you just got to be friends with them all. I mean, I remember going to Frank Brennan's 21st birthday party at the Days Barracks in Liverpool. I don't know how long ago that is, but quite a long time ago. It was really nice. And I say Frank lived with his mum and Jimmy lived with his dad. They were separated, and Jimmy and his dad ran a hardware shop on Mill Street in the Dingle, where I was originally from. Frank and his mum lived towards West Derby, I think, round Daysbrook anyway. So you got to know these guys, and I could tell you where they'd be at any time of day. In fact, quite a number of years ago now, I think it was the late 90s or something like that, I'd taken a bunch of guys over to Lancaster for the camp in Lancaster, and we were come back to Liverpool, and we did a little tour of the Anfield ground, you know, the touristy stuff. And I said, what time is it? And it was like 11:45. I said, let's go down to the Triangle. I said, Andy and Frank and a few of the black belts will be coming out by now. And we got to the Triangle gates right around 12 o'clock. And there they were, just coming out the stairs in the courtyard, getting the cars out. So I got to say hello. But that was how tight everybody was. You knew, because of the training schedule, where they were going to be at any one time. So it was quite the tight-knit little family. The kids group that I taught was taken over by John McCormack, who unfortunately passed a few years later, but super nice guy. And the kids I had in that class included Tony Harrison, Miles Draper, Robbie Quinn, just a whole bunch of guys that went on to be really good karateka, did very well in national and international competition. So I was quite proud of that over the years, that I did my little bit to, put those people on. So basically, we trained your usual way that people trained in those times, traditional training. We do stretching, warm-up, basics up and down the dojo, combinations, drills with each other and solo drills, and sparring and kata. And that was it. But it was extremely hard. It was extremely challenging. You worked your guts out. Probably left most of them on the floor if you'd had a good night. And you went back the next day and did it all again. And that was how we did it. And I don't regret any of it. it just made me appreciate my karate throughout my life. And that's the way it should be, I think. I'm not sure why people do karate these days, but I did it because I just loved it. It gave me a lot. I gave a lot to it. And I guess when you're invested that much in anything, it becomes a way of life. And that's what it was for me. Anyway, this is John Hanratty from Hanratty on Karate. If you've got any comments, queries or questions, any feedback at all, let me have it. Thank you.